idea for having a day like today really came about during the work of the West Beach Task Force, which was put together in 2011, and their work concluded earlier this year. But they were working with this notion that this part of our community here around the Sandcastle and in West Beach is approaching 40 years old, and we really needed to have a thoughtful way of looking at how we reinvest in our community, whether that be common properties or regimes or individual properties. And so that group spent a great bit of time talking about various issues associated with the how and the why, and why some people reinvest and some people don't, and what are things that could be done to help jumpstart that process. Obviously, KICA has spent some money on a couple of landscape projects in the West Beach area to really breathe new life into some tired-looking common areas, and that's beautiful. Some regimes have done some tremendous work, and what we're starting to see is that a few single-family property owners along those routes have wanted to tag along, and they've seen the benefit and have felt really good about what is happening. And so we felt like that one of the reasons, or what we kept hearing, was that a lot of people just don't know where to start, and they know that there's a process involved in making improvements here, and we figured if there's a way that KICA can lend a hand in making that process easier, at least helping people to understand what's the starting point and what are the steps along the way, and try to simplify it to whatever extent that we could make that happen. We thought that would be a worthwhile objective. So that's sort of the genesis of this first landscape symposium and plant sale. And today this is our guinea pig effort. We hope that we'll learn something today and do this again, and get bigger and better each time we do it. But really, an ideal person to kick this off, someone who's been a big part of the sort of visioning for this community since really the very beginning, is Mark Permar. He's here to share a few thoughts on this project with us this morning.
Okay, thanks, Jim. What I was asked to help provide today was maybe a context or a sense of background of how would a day like this happen? Why are we doing this? And more importantly, how can we make a difference? And that is one of two things that, forget actually what I do on the little slideshow that I have here, is that there are two thoughts that I'd like to leave with everyone in this room. This is a really great time to be a part of Kiawah. This really is. Our community is maturing, and it is becoming, and has become for many decades now, but is really coming full force of our community. And the reason I say that is during the early years, the pioneer years of a thing like Kiawah, it's heavily oriented toward the master developer. And I don't want to say it's like a company town, but it's the developers doing things, and it's both roads, water, sewer, as well as all the amenities, our home sites that we've chosen to be a part of, and the resort component. And those two areas sort of dominate during the very early years. But as the community matures, and that's the zone that we are well within now, those things are important, but they're not the lead anymore. It's our community now. You had the eras of Mr. Royal and his family, where this was a private retreat for a handful of people. And the little subdivision down on Eugene Avenue was sort of an example of that. The rest of it was sort of hunting grounds and just roaming areas. Then you have the Kuwaiti era, in which it starts a different vision for a place like Kiawah. It becomes more public. The public is invited in. Resort is a much stronger component as it relates to the residential side. The resort is more dominant. And then as the Kiawah partners come in, there's the beginning of a transition of a greater balance between the resort influences and the residential influences. We had the introduction of an incorporated town of Kiawah Island now. Now we start to take our own initiative in terms of governmental controls of permitting, regulatory issues, and that sort of thing. Our community association becomes more under the influence of property owners as board members. I remember being a board member for about 6 years during the Kuwaiti period. Well, the board was dominated by appointed members by the company. The property owners had a minority interest. Well, now that's the majority of the property owners. My point here is the reason this is a good time to be a part of Kiawah is it's our time, it's our era, it's our opportunity to make a difference, and that's the second point. So let me give you a sense of, I don't know if we could dim the lights here, Jim. I cobbled together a couple of presentations that were done by the community association, either the board members or subcommittees that were really charged with how can we start to assume greater responsibility for the destiny of our community as it relates to the built world. And as I said, it's a bit cobbled together. But what started, this was our starter set, obviously, West Beach Village, and the core of that was the 150-room inn. And that was, for many of us, that was the introduction. That was the front door of the introduction of what Kiawah was like and provided access to a lot of us in terms of those first impressions. Well, we have a big hole in the donut now. We have a void there, and that's going to evolve with whatever the planning and development standards are for the resort. But let's see how to best say this. We're sort of inside a locker room here, so let me say it this way. We, as a community, we tended to wait until the resort was going to do its thing. And that has merit to it. But eventually, we have to assume a greater responsibility. The resort is going to do whatever it's going to do in their time fashion. And we want to urge that to happen as quickly as possible, because that can influence, in the West Beach area, not just the core, but the whole west end of the island can have a very positive influence. And we'll do everything we can as a community to help make that happen in the best way possible. But the waiting part, we can't do that forever. So the Community Association Board said, well, what can we do? How can we both encourage the resort to advance their planning and development for the old inn site, whether that's another inn or whether it's residential? How can we support that? But more importantly, what can we do on our own initiative in the West Beach area? So, and I'm using this as an example. This is sort of like the canary in the mine. By that I mean, this started in the mid-'70s. And I never thought I'd be around to the point where we're talking about renovating a village. You know, it's always about the new, fresh village. But we're talking about refreshing, hitting the refresh button of not only the core village, but the whole West End. There are some great examples of individual expression of people doing improvements in this area, but they're not connected enough yet. There's really great advancement, as Jimmy said, in terms of individual regimes and associations that over the past 2 years have really taken the initiative for mid and long-term programs to improve their property. But what can we do as a community to help advance that? And that's how this day actually started. What prompted that was a member survey of the West Beach property owner base. And Shannon, I can't remember, like 1,400 property owners? I might be off a little bit, but that's good. And so we went out to the property owners and asked them for assistance in their own take on each of these different topics. And there are some things that we hadn't thought we didn't know about that we heard. There's some things that we would rather not have heard about than we heard. And there are other things that help shape a program that allows for us as a community to take charge and see if there are ways that we can discover ways to improve. This sketch, which is a little hard to see, is a diagram done by one of the board members in which it starts to develop a strategy that is dual in nature. When you start to get feedback of what we could do as a community in terms of improvements, whether that's assistance with the role that the ARB plays, or the town can help with improved and enhanced regulations that are unique to transition areas, or a larger vision. You know, it's apples, oranges, and kumquats, but there's a tendency to have so much on your plate that it would be better to do fewer things initially and do them really well than to try to do too much. So what this diagram is trying to show is that if you use the different areas of individual ownership, you know, homes, condominiums, and that sort of thing, or neighborhoods, collections of areas, such as the Oyster Rake area, or Old Dock, you know, those areas that are sort of evolved as sort of classic neighborhoods, or the greater community, the whole, let's use the whole West End, not just West Beach as a core area, but the whole West End, that first 5 years of development history on Kiawah. Are there areas in each one of those categories that we could begin to look at improving or establishing as many properties as possible with the goal of, you know, bringing them up to existing standards of both the review board and the community association? And we gauge that as about a 12 to 18 month process to get that organized. Not that it takes 18 months to get all the properties up to snuff, but the idea of get the system organized in such a way that we can attack that. Goal 2 is a little bit more aggressive in terms of a 3 to 5 year process of more aggressively trying to revitalize both exterior and landscape on each of these categories. And then, as I pointed out, the integrated redevelopment area is all about bold moves by both the master developer, well, I should say not both, but the master developer, the Kiawah Island Golf Resort, and the community association as a whole. What can we do as a group on a much higher level to prompt things such as the revitalization of the old Insight or new development that might occur along Beachwalker Drive? So the idea was, let's focus on those things that we think we can do best sooner. You know, make it more tactical, not strategic all the time, but make it more tactical. These were the 4 areas that sort of started to shape themselves out of the member survey of areas that we can be more specific as to implementing certain work programs, such as strengthen and enhance some property values. We always put that at the top because we think that's important to the health of the greater community. Lead by example. That is, not only tell people what they should do, but we ought to do it as a community organization, a community association. Use our examples of expending money in specific ways and point to that as, that's an example of what we're talking about in whatever the category is. Leverage financial, excuse me, and human resources. The idea there is we only have so much in the way of resources. How can we make one of those things multiply to 3 or 4? Is there a bottle of water or something I could grab? I'm still dealing with this pollen world that we're in. And then finally, and more importantly, how can we best encourage individuals to upgrade their property? What are the little nuances that aren't you know, used with a hammer, but with a carrot? How can we balance, you know, encouraging people to enhance their property? Because, you know, rules are always the best ones that are self-compliant. So what are those things that allow people to do that naturally? Thanks, Sean. It's sort of like Mark Rubio, right? No, that's So, for example, and I won't go through these because these are more detailed, but this was an example of what the board did in terms of organizing their thoughts. In terms of strengthening and enhancing property values, we have KIC property, we have villas and cottages, single family, and then resort or commercial, the larger parcels that are yet to be developed. In each one of these categories, we had a way of thinking about that category that would address that specific audience. So for example, with KICA, in terms of enhancing property values, we should develop a comprehensive plan for the streetscape. I mean, for the areas that we own and control as a community association. Let's take that on as not as a caretaker process, but as a proactive, how can we take our assets and display